Hello, everyone. Welcome to Growing Web3. Today, I'm extremely excited to have Richard Chen from 1confirmation here with us. 1confirmation is a leading VC which has made early investments into projects such as OpenSea, Coinbase, SuperRare, DYDX, and many more. Richard, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
So I'd love to chat to you a little bit about what you were doing before working at 1confirmation, how you got into crypto space.
Yeah, so I got into crypto around 2015. So this was back when I was at school at Stanford. I was doing research in cryptography, and that's actually how I learned about cryptocurrencies. Found out about Bitcoin, Ethereum for the first time because of cryptography, and just felt like the most natural use case. And then later co-founded the Stanford Blockchain Club with a few other folks. And from there, just really went deep into the rabbit hole.
Awesome. And what made you want to work in Web3? Was there like a trigger, something that really interested you?
Yeah, I think it's just first of all, the average age in Web3 is probably mid, late 20s. And it's this new cutting edge technology that I feel millennials, just younger people have a better grasp on. And I'm not so much of an establishment, an institution person where you slave away at McKinsey for a couple of years, then you go to business school, join a Fortune 500 company. So I want to do bleeding edge technology, and crypto just happened to be the most interesting thing to me, and the most natural fit for my skill sets.
Awesome. And what do you see as the role of VC firms in the space?
Yeah, I'd say there's a big difference between VC firms and traders, and I think in the last cycle, people started conflating the two. But really, VC firms are long-term capital where they're willing to be patient and hold through multiple bull bear market cycles. They're oftentimes kind of a sounding board for founders, kind of the first person the founder calls if really good news or really bad news happens. So yeah, you're just kind of grinding the trenches with founders and believing in them from day one.
Awesome. I think one thing which has made you super famous on crypto Twitter are all your Dune dashboards. I remember seeing a really early, this is when I was kind of getting into DeFi, 2019. I remember seeing a Dune dashboard you did on DeFi users,
Yep.
Which was super cool. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you created that, how it kind of helped you get an overview of the ecosystem, if it helped you with any of your investments.
Yeah, I think the impetus for that was actually, do you remember the bet that Jimmy Song and Joe Lubin made at Consensus 2018? That basically Jimmy Song's a Bitcoin maximalist, and he made a bet that there won't be any Ethereum apps, dApps that will have more than 100,000 users in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I was actually curious to see how that bet was performing, because my gut sense was Uniswap Compound already had pretty good product market fit within the small community, and that's what prompted to make that dashboard. And it's really cool seeing the really exponential growth over time, where DeFi started really in the SF crypto community back in 2017, 2018. The term DeFi was invented in a Telegram group chat in I think it's October 2018, and shortly thereafter there was the very first DeFi conference, or the conference that used the term DeFi, and that was only a couple hundred people. And then now I think according to that dashboard, we're almost 5 million unique addresses that have interacted with a major DeFi protocol.
Yeah, that's awesome. I remember, was it the guys from Dharma who set up that?
Yeah, it's Dharma, SEP protocol, a lot of the SF DeFi, early DeFi projects.
Yeah, and I remember being at a conference. I think it was actually Stanford Blockchain Conference, maybe January or February 2019, maybe March. Everyone was still arguing about it should be called DeFi, it should be called open finance.
Yep, exactly.
And I was like, what? Guys, just chill. Things are working. Let's just decide on name and go for it.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of liked open finance, but I'm glad we went with DeFi.
Yeah.
So when you built out those dashboards, did that kind of help you understand Web3 data better? And yeah, how did you kind of use that for your in your day job, I guess?
Yeah. Well, at the time, this was before the whole like yield farming craze happened. So like a
Hmm.
lot of the growth was like very organic. So it was a good way to kind of parse through like crypto Twitter and kind of see like what's actually being used versus like what's like a really hot narrative that's like being shilled a lot, but
Yeah.
like doesn't have much usage. Like if you look at their KPIs.
And what kind of, so the early projects that kind of saw product market fit, I guess it was like, was Uniswap, the lending protocols, um, what kind of other ones were there in the DeFi
Yeah, I'd
ecosystem?
say it's like really just like the core like building block financial primitives. It was really like mostly just DeFi. It's like so, MakerDAO was really the first
Hmm.
project. So MakerDAO basically started DeFi. They were the very first project to launch in December 2017, and
Yeah.
then Uniswap launched November 2018, I think. And like they very quickly got usage. Like it's kind of when when AMMs were invented, it was like a very 0 to 1 moment that kind of replaced all of the order book dexes that came before, like Ether Delta
Yeah.
and all of those. And then Compound I think launched 2018, and like really solidified like their dominance in the lending market and like the lending borrowing marketplace.
Awesome. And then from there, I was following like the other dashboards you built, and you started building some kind of data analysis around NFTs as well. How did that kind of come about? Was it just a similar interest in the space?
Yeah, so I think the first, I mean, other like there's obviously OpenSea.
Hmm.
A lot of it was just like for portfolio companies, is just tracking their KPIs. And I think what was really striking about NFTs is like the monthly volume graphs were growing like 50% month over month, especially for super rare.
Yeah.
But like the y-axis was still like really tiny. So like, yeah, it's 50% month over month growth, but they might be doing like 1 million in like monthly volume. Um, but so like that's why like people kind of wrote it off. But people also forget like I think as a VC, it's hardest to internalize like what exponential growth feels like, and if you just kind of project it out like mathematically, that like explodes like pretty quickly if you're growing like that fast, like month over month. And like that was what I saw really early on with the Dune data, especially like the dashboard I made for Super Rare, and like that's what gave us conviction to make the Super Rare investment in like early to mid 2020,
Hmm.
which is like about half a year before like NFTs
Yeah.
exploded, before people got into NFTs and all of that.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I remember that pretty well. I remember thinking like, wow, the volumes are pretty low, but there was just this like undercurrent of momentum. And there were like really like so many fanatics who were on crypto Twitter, like a small amount, but they were like fanatics about NFTs. And
Yeah.
yeah, it was really interesting to see how quickly that all snowballed. So what kind of metrics do you look for? Like, is volume the key one for NFT projects?
So if it's a marketplace, yes, like volume would be like the most important KPI.
Hmm.
There's other like metrics I look at, like kind of like monthly active like artists and collectors, um, like number of artworks sold, like kind of what's like average artwork price. Like another interesting metric is like time from like mint to sale,
Okay,
and like how that evolves over time.
awesome.
Basically, are like artists like selling things quickly, or are they like do the NFTs like sit unsold for like a very long time? Those are some metrics I've tracked.
Awesome. And how do you think, how do you kind of see the way that NFT projects have evolved? I feel like there's like a proliferation right now of
Hmm.
low quality projects. Um, and yeah, I think that's obviously been driven by like PFPs and how it's been become pretty easy to just launch a PFP project. But I know that 1confirmation, you're investing in NFTs themselves, right?
Yeah,
In addition to the platforms.
yeah. So we raised like $100 million NFT fund a few months ago, and like that's just to invest in NFTs themselves, like the JPEGs. And while our main venture funds like invest in the equity companies like OpenSea, SuperRare, like the
Hmm.
platforms themselves. Um, and really it's just like we want to get exposure to like what's going to be culturally significant in like the next 5 years is who's going to be like the next Andy Warhol of like the Web3 generation. And you can kind of segment NFTs into like different verticals. Like there's art, like one-of-one art, there's generative art, there's photography, music, PFPs, and trying to pick like the most blue chip projects in each vertical, and just kind of like index a basket of who are going to be like the most like culturally relevant creators over the next few years.
Very cool. And are you using using data to kind of go off these decisions, or is it more like around like the culture in the community? Like
it's more like culture, community. I like to compare it as like left versus like right brain investing, and like NFTs. Like if you're buying NFTs directly, it's very like right brain investing, where you're kind of like a Hollywood talent agency, and you have to bet on artists really early, and a lot of that's just like feel, culture, community, how well do they understand like their audience, community, marketing, like what they're doing that's different, that's pushing the space forward. So like Drifter Shoots is like a very good example. I mean, he has like kind of all of like the perfect ingredients for like being a like breakout artist. Like he's a person of color, he was like wrongly incarcerated, he's like doing like crazy dangerous things just to get like photographs of him like dangling his feet off a skyscraper. And it's just like something that's so unique that like no one else could replicate. And like he's also understands community, marketing, culture extremely well, and is not the type of person who just wants to do a cash grab and like then just rug his collectors. So he's like repeatedly coming back and finding creative ways to like add value to his collectors and his fan base. So like that's an example of like a creator who just intimately understands like how to build like a Web3 native brand through NFTs. And like we want to back creators like him and others.
That's awesome. I feel like, I mean, I've been reading a lot of your recent tweets and generally agreeing with all of them. And like the last couple of years saw like a huge influx of capital into the space. And over the last 2 years, there's definitely been this feeling that a lot is getting funded that maybe shouldn't, or a lot of projects are getting maybe too much funding, and people are taking advantage of that. And so I think it's really interesting to kind of think about how some projects are growing organically. Like the project you just mentioned sounds like it's very much focused on cultivating like this early community, and then comparing that to like some projects which just have a huge amount of capital and are kind of trying to force growth. So I'd love to kind of hear about how you see like the difference between Web 2 and Web 3 growth, and how in Web 3 there's still different types of growth. There's like this organic and more forced paid growth.
Yeah, I think Web 2 growth, the main difference is like a lot of industries in Web 2 are very operational and like execution heavy. And it's like zero sum game. So a really good example would be like food delivery is like VCs are willing, there's like maybe like 5 major food delivery companies, and like VCs are willing to like give them massive war chests so that they could be like unprofitable for a long time, but basically like play a war of attrition game where you just like bankrupt your competitors, and until you have a monopoly, then you can like increase prices and then basically recoup all that losses. So like I think that works really well for like operationally intensive businesses like food delivery, where a lot of it is just onboarding as many drivers, users, expanding to new cities. I think Web3 things are a lot less zero sum. So like those types of like operational intensive, like cash burning growth hacks like don't work in Web3. And I've also seen like historically like ecosystem funds. So like a lot of where this money is coming from are like ecosystem funds. Like say some new L1 will raise like a $400 million ecosystem fund and just like throw it at projects to build things like wallets and other infrastructure. And like that's happened like many, many times like over like the last several years with like new L1s. And like what I've seen is like ecosystem funds just usually end up turning into like an adverse selection for founders, where the best founders can raise on like any chain they want to build. Like they can build on Ethereum where there's no ecosystem fund and just, you know, raise from the top tier VCs. So like kind of what I've seen is, you know, a founder, like maybe like a tier 2, tier 3 founder will like kind of pitch all the VCs for this project they're building on Ethereum, kind of fail to raise. And 6 months later, they'll be building on a new like L1 because they got an ecosystem grant from them. So that's just like a trend I've seen happen like over and over again in the last few years.
And how, so yeah, that's like, obviously that's the layer one, the protocol trying to grow the application layer, because everyone's fighting right now for the application layer, right? They're all fighting for developers. And how do you see that kind of moving to the user layer? Because I mean, the majority of users are still on Ethereum, especially when it comes to NFT projects, or the majority of volume at least. How do you kind of see that translating? I guess, do you still see the best founders looking at Ethereum and then looking to go multi-chain, or how do they approach things?
Yeah, I mean, in the past like 2 years, I'd say like all the new like ideas, new interesting projects, and that are like pushing the space forward are like those founders are still like building on Ethereum, and you know, stuff on other chains are like largely, you know, copycats, like, you know, building the Uniswap on this other like L1, or like building an Aave on this other L1. And then there's an argument to be made that like you have to build like these like kind of fundamental building blocks before you can have like new ideas. But like I guess the founders that are drawn to like those other chains that are like building copycats tend to be like more mercenary. And it's a lot harder space to invest in because the ideas are so obvious. So there's going to be like 10 teams that are trying to build like a DEX on Solana or like some other chain. And so like, because all of this, the primitives are already built out in like Ethereum ecosystem, like in order to like build something new that's pushing the space forward, like you have to be more creative. And like, that's kind of what draws a lot of the top founders who have like interesting ideas to like build on Ethereum.
That's cool. I like that. I like the way of looking at things. Yeah, I think Ethereum is still, it's like the most competitive, and that's, yeah, as you said, it's the best way to kind of find founders who are looking to be super creative and really like innovate. I think we've seen like quite a lot of innovation recently. I think it seemed like there was a quiet period, but I think projects like Curve and a few others have really pushed DeFi forward now, and there's lots of interesting stuff happening again.
Right.
So what projects do you feel are kind of doing growth right and like taking the correct organic approach to growth?
I say Nouns is a good example. Nouns DAO.
Yeah.
They're like a PFP like collection that like we've invested in, and this is also kind of reference to like one of my earlier tweets from a few weeks ago. I was like comparing Loot and Nouns, and like they were both like launched around the same time. Maybe Nouns was like about a month earlier, but like Loot was like super like overhyped on Twitter. People were talking about like how this is going to be like the building block for like the next like Web3 like blockbuster game, but ultimately like the people who were like buying Loot were more interested in like speculating on price of the NFT rather than actually like staying and like building for the community. And whereas like the Nouns community, it was a lot more organic, because like the people who bought Nouns were less interested in just like pure price speculation, but like bought into the idea that this is like a great merge between like a PFP collection and an investment DAO, and like are like and like had a bunch of creative ideas of like how can we grow the Nouns IP through like all the ETH that's accumulated in this treasury. So there were Nouns is like a lot more thoughtful in their growth of like how do we build this brand, doing partnerships like with Budweiser, like having the Nouns glasses, stuff like that. And I actually think Nouns and like a lot of like NFT projects should like actually hire someone who has experience with like growth marketing from like Web2. Is like kind of I think a big question is like how do you measure customer lifetime value in like the Web3 world? And like you can measure customer acquisition costs, like how much do you spend on advertising on like a Super Bowl commercial, but like how much value does it actually bring for the community long term in terms of like more brand IP awareness? Yeah, I think it's just a matter of time before like one of these NFT projects will be like the like leading brand in like that's like kind of part in mainstream culture, like kind of how we see like Louis Vuitton, Gucci, and these brands that were like started like decades, maybe like century ago, that are just like so like permeated in culture today. And I think we're in like the very early innings of that with like Web3 NFT projects, and it's just kind of a question of how can we be like smart in terms of like growth and building this brand.
Absolutely. I think that the kind of really interesting thing there is that Nouns, as you said, it started organically, and the amount of work that the Nouns community put in before it, became so popular as it is now. I mean, it's still fairly niche, but it's still got a very high amount of interest, especially in like the daily auctions. The Nouns NFTs are still selling for probably near to $100K every day, which is amazing. Is that maybe it was better that they didn't get the hype that Loot got, because Loot obviously got completely, it went crazy. It meant it got a lot of like people that probably, they were just speculating, they're mercenary in the community, and that probably damaged them for, in the long term, because they didn't have this core base of contributors who were just there for the mission.
This also reminds me of another point is I noticed like it's kind of counterintuitive, but like the founders that raise a lot of VC money beforehand are actually more likely to fizzle out than the founders who kind of raise like a smaller amount to find product market fit before they raise their big round. And it sounds counterintuitive, but like it's what we've seen historically in our portfolio as well as like other projects in the crypto space. And I think a large reason is if you raise a lot of money upfront, you get a lot of awareness, but then there's a lot of pressure with like expectations. It's harder to be nimble and kind of pivot while you're still like finding product market fit. Oftentimes having a lot of money means like founders want to hire really quickly, but that becomes tricky when you have to pivot because suddenly like say like half of your team is like their skills are no longer like relevant anymore. So maybe you have to do layoffs. Like these are all like tricky internal conflict and like decisions that like founders have to make. And it's a lot of it is like a result of just expectation awareness, like being more sloppy with hiring and spending if you raise like too much like out of the bat.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And completely counterintuitive, because the Web2 way is raise the most money as quickly as possible and deploy the most resources and crush your competition. And in Web3, the small and nimble teams are consistently doing extremely well.
Yes. Like Uniswap was like fewer than 10 people for like a very long time. Now Uniswap Labs is like 140 or something. But it's crazy seeing like how these small nimble teams like just execute like really well. Like OpenSea was also like sub 10 people for a very long time before things exploded, and they grew from like 10 to like 200 in like I say like half a year. It's just interesting seeing like these smaller nimble teams just out execute.
Yeah, that's awesome. So a couple quick fire questions to finish off the show. So if you were getting started today and you were like, where do you think the biggest opportunities are for founders coming into the space? NFTs, DAOs, DeFi?
I guess I know we've been talking a lot about Ethereum, but I do think like Cosmos ecosystem is still like relatively under the radar. And the interesting thing about Cosmos is like their community is like very organic. and like which is why and the growth is like largely organic. And I think the reason why it's under the radar is because like Cosmos doesn't have a strongman leader that can like, really shill the project and like, be very like abrasive and like active on like crypto Twitter and like kind of build a cult like following around it. So the founders that are building in Cosmos like tend to be more missionary and like believe in like the open source grassroots ethos of the community. So I think there's still a lot of like green space in the Cosmos ecosystem. Like, IBC and like the potential of, cross-chain apps is still like very nascent. So there's a lot to be built there.
Very cool. Very cool. And final question, if you could be CMO or head of growth for any project in the space, you kind of, let's say you get unlimited budget to do whatever crazy stuff you want to do, which one would you choose?
That's a good question. I guess nouns, like, kind of going back to like what I said with nouns, like that would be a good one because it's like kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity just to be like, it's like traveling back in time to like the early 1900s, where like Ralph Lauren was like just getting started. A lot of these like major like luxury brands were like just getting started, and just kind of going through first principles again and seeing like, how do you build this brand like organically over time, over like many decades, such that it just becomes kind of second nature and like part of our culture that you don't question like Rolex or like Gucci or Ralph Lauren or any of these like brands as like kind of the blue chips in like fashion and retail. And I think a lot of these like punks, nouns, that's like the upside for them. And if they can execute really well on like growth marketing, they could be that in like 5-10 years.
I love that. I'm a huge fan of the nouns community, and I really believe that, the way that their community is structured, all the incentives, I feel like it's one of the first times I've seen like an NFT community be like so aligned around like this common goal, which is just like proliferate the nouns meme, which is really amazing to see. So I think that's a great choice. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been awesome to pick your brain on all these topics. And where can people follow you and stay up to date with you and 1confirmation? Yeah,
I'm Richard Chen 39 on Twitter. His email's richard@1confirmation.com. And feel free to follow me or send me a DM or email. Awesome. Thanks so much, Richard. Great. Thank you.